Hey, I want to welcome you back to our third episode of Montana Investigates. My name is Sean, and we are analyzing political attack ads in the great state of Montana. We look at both parties, paring their ads down, find the truth, the lies, the misrepresentations that so freely follow these ads. Most importantly, we're going to look at the organizations that are funding these ads and putting them out. Today, we're going to look at an ad that hit Madison County a couple of weeks ago now from the Montana Freedom PAC. And basically, this ad is going after Kurt Alme for what, if you've been following any of Montana politics recently, what they're calling basically kind of the anointing of Alme as the Republican candidate in the state of for the U.S. Senate in the state of Montana. And what these three articles that they kind of highlight on the front of their flyer, basically, they're just talking about the process that went through where Daines basically gave up his seat, and minutes later, Kurt Alme filed to be the candidate, and they did it on the last day in the last minute so that nobody else could file once they knew Daines was dropping out of the race. Nothing really salacious, I would say, in this flyer. We'll go through it pretty quick. But it is something that's kind of on a lot of Montanan, the minds of Montanans, and mostly on the Republican side. This didn't really go over too well, and we'll actually look into what Kurt Alme, what he said about it, what his side of the story is. But if you go to the back of the flyer, it kind of lays it out. It says on March 4th, 3 minutes before the candidate's filing deadline, Mr. Daines made the surprise announcement that he would not seek a third term. He did not stop there. Daines immediately endorsed Kurt Alme, who had filed his own candidacy a mere 5 minutes earlier. So this all happened at the 11th hour. Alme puts in his papers to be a candidate. Immediately, Daines falls out. The time expires. Nobody else is able to file as a candidate on the Republican side. I wasn't able to, the 3 minutes, 4 minutes. I'm not sure, how close it was to filing deadline. That seems to be consistent across stories, and I haven't heard anybody on Alme's side say that those are lies or misrepresentations. So we'll just take it. I mean, this happened to the last hour, the last minute, possible to do that, and it just made it look like, okay, the powers to be in Washington just decided who the Republican candidate in Montana would be, not giving anybody in Montana a choice. You can see they put as their source at the very bottom of the article. There's a New York Times article. That's I think one of the three that they showed at the very front. So that's basically it. It's pretty. It doesn't seem. We'll listen to Kurt Alme what he says about it. It's pretty straightforward, and it does look shady, I would say, on first light. We'll talk a little bit about that and how these things work. But let me just go into a little bit about the organization, the so-called Montana Freedom PAC. Once again, they have a website. Not a whole lot to it, once again. They say they're if you look at the very top, a veteran-led organization. I was trying to figure out who the veterans were. Wasn't quite successful with that in the time I put towards it. I talked a little bit about what they stand for. It says they stand for public lands, our working communities, and our belief that decisions about Montana should be made by Montanans. You're going to find that to be a little funny here in a little bit, but and I'll keep reading. Montana Freedom PAC is committed to supporting leaders who will put Montana first and answer only to Montanans. And then in the last paragraph, I'm just kind of jumping around. We do not need backroom deals and trading favors. And we sure as hell don't need candidates chosen by Washington insiders before voters have their say. You're going to find that to be a little ironic here in a bit. So when I look at these websites, I always go down to see where they're located. And this caught my eye. Before I knew anything about them, this kind of caught my eye. At the bottom of their website, usually where you put your address, phone number, things like that, they had really nothing. They had an email address, I guess they have there. That was just interesting right away. I was like, oh, this will probably be good. And of course, if you go to their FEC filing, you will see Montana Freedom PAC. Its mailing address is F Street, Washington, D.C. So in my mind, so much for those decisions being made in Montana. So again, we have an organization based out of Washington, D.C., that is trying to influence the U.S. Senate race in Montana. And just, for the record, this organization is 100% behind Seth Bodner. You can look up the treasurer's name. It's an interesting name. But again, bottom line, it's out of Washington, D.C. The money that started this thing did not come from Montana. Now, I understand. Let's be honest with ourselves. Campaigns are costly. You have to pay staff. You have to travel. All those things. So I'm not saying there's. You need money. I just always kind of gives me a heartburn when you got an organization here calling itself the Montana Freedom PAC, claiming it wants to give choices to Montanans and not have decisions made in D.C., and then it's based out of Washington, D.C. Here's just some of the people that started up this PAC, gave the money, as you can look. Wayback PAC, Michael Smith, Western Futures Fund, Global Impact Social Welfare Fund, Western Futures Fund, Sam Walton, Greg Avis, Scott Shanker. Then if you go to the column where it says state, you see that not one of those gentlemen claims the state of Montana to be their home. And in the far right column, you see the amount they give, pretty big sums of money. And you're saying that money is not going to, that Montanans are deciding about their future when you're trying to influence a campaign backing Seth Bodner. It just doesn't stand up to me when you call yourself the Montana Freedom PAC. One of the big donors, Scott Shanker, gave $100,000. He's from Berkeley, California, and he's a scientist. Then you got Greg Avis out of Los Angeles, California. He only gave $10,000, but again, to the Montana Freedom PAC. And I'm not going to go through this. Or this is an article when I was doing some of the research I came across. It's from Inside Elections, and they supposedly say they're nonpartisan. They do nonpartisan analysis, and they kind of jumped into this the dark money on the Democratic side, or at least independent side, also with Seth Bodner. And they produced this graph, which kind of shows all the different dark money organizations, how they're all interconnected, and the only reason I'm showing this is I'm not going to research every one of those, but just the names that were listed on the Montana Freedom PAC, you see several of them in this chart, and it shows their linkage about where these deep pockets are given money to help fuel these campaigns. And again, I just want to say, you got to have money to run a campaign, but why do you have to do it this way? Just be open about it. I mean, if you really want to be the Montana Freedom PAC, open your office in Helena, Montana. But no, it's just easier for them. I'm sure there's rules that I don't know about, the reason why they do it in Washington. Easier to hide the money. But you're not the Montana Freedom PAC, really, if you're out of Washington, D.C., and your money's coming from California and Colorado and other places like that. Okay, it's going to be a quick one. I said we're just going to listen to an interview that Kurt Alme gave where he was questioned about this, just so you can see his side of the story. We'll talk a little bit about it. So we're just going to watch now 2 video clips from Nonstop Local again. I really like. I think these guys do a pretty fair job for the candidates. We're just going to hear what Mr. Alme had to say about this whole controversy.
Just a few days before then, which was the filing deadline, I got a call from Senator Daines saying that he and Cindy would like to retire, but they were concerned about losing his seat and losing the Senate to the Democrats. So he said he would only step down if someone like me would step up and run.
Basically, what he's saying is that this was a last-minute decision. Mr. Daines decided he wasn't going to run, and so he calls Kurt Alme a week before the actual deadline. So he goes on his narrative, and I encourage you guys to actually listen to this. Again, it's April 3rd of this year, Nonstop Local. Alme says that, hey, okay, so the last day, that's when Daines finally made the decision, called him up, and they said, okay, I'll run, and they did this rush to get filed for the position. I don't, on first glance, I don't quite buy this, but to be fair, having worked in government for a while, sometimes these things do happen like this. You'd think that they'd have better foresight and understanding, but sometimes they have other priorities, other things are going on, and it does kind of sometimes just happen like this. Having said that, though, I just have a hard time believing this one. I mean, you know, politics in Washington is a big deal. These things are thought out way in advance. And I mean, I don't think I just have a hard time believing this. But to be fair, I've seen where things happen like this before. Those involved look like idiots or look like they're trying to do something maybe a little bit nefarious. But sometimes it just does happen like that. Now the reporter, he does give a follow up question. I'm going to show that next. He says that, what do you say to those people, kind of like myself, who don't quite buy this story? And let me just play for you what Kurt Alme says.
Well, and Senator Daines, this was Senator Daines' process, and what Senator Daines has explained is that he wanted to discourage John Tester and Steve Bullock from entering the race, to try to discourage what has happened with Democrats in Alaska and Ohio and North Carolina now.
So Alme's response is basically, this was Daines' process. Daines is the one who laid to the last minute, kind of pushing it on Daines, saying this isn't on me. But yeah, I just have a hard time buying. Again, I know these things happen like this sometimes, and it seems nefarious stuff. But this one I'm having a hard time buying that this is actually the real way this went down. But I'm gonna leave it up to you, what you think. And that's pretty much all we're going to do for this episode. So hoping to see you again soon. We got another short one coming up pretty quick. And thanks again for listening in.